What's a potential unmarked grave? It might be roots, it might be rocks, it might be an animal burrow. Everyone has the right to question that, because until these claims are proven in a court of law with evidence, they're just claims, they're allegations. And what could be more destabilizing to society than promoting a blood libel on Catholics in Canadian history? Some students were abused. There were 31 convictions listed in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports, over 139 schools in 133 years. Most students were voluntarily enrolled by their own parents who wanted them to have useful education for the modern world. Some parents wanted the free daycare. Some parents had remarried, and sadly, the new partner did not want the other's kids. And many families were huge by today's standards, and even the standards then. Families with 10, 12, 14 children could not feed and care for them all, so many of the kids were sent to Indian residential school to survive. The kids may not have liked it or understood that their parents were all part of the scheme. But how is this different from today's parent taking a child to their first day of school, distracting them with a toy, and then running away?
Hello, Action for Canada friends. We're so glad you've joined us, and a warm welcome to you. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. Our guest speaker this evening is Michelle Stirling, and the title of tonight's show is Criminalizing Denialism, Burying the Facts. It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2026, and this is the Empower Hour. If you're joining us for the first time, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Tanya Gaw, the founder and leader of Action for Canada. For nearly 11 years, Tanya has been focusing on faith, family, and freedom, and she and the Action for Canada team work relentlessly and uncompromisingly to bring awareness to the many critical issues facing our nation, including tonight's very important topic. Tanya will be coming on in just a few moments, but first, I'd like to introduce tonight's guest. It's always so good to have Michelle Stirling joining us on the Empower Hour. Michelle is a career counselor, author, investigative researcher, columnist and blogger, filmmaker and television producer, and a fearless truth teller. She has boldly and unapologetically spent many years exposing the agendas, narratives, and policies that threatened Canada's sovereignty, prosperity, and constitutional foundations. Michelle has been a guest on the Empower Hour several times, and we encourage you to go back and watch her previous informative interviews if you haven't seen them. And we also recommend you watch Michelle's documentary video, The Bitter Roots of Sugarcane. We are always so grateful for Michelle's insights and extensive research as she continues to expose lies and deception. Will you all please help me welcome Michelle Stirling. Hello, Michelle. Welcome to the Empower Hour.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you, Heather, and thanks for doing such a great job in showing our viewers how to get to our resources. You're right, that UNDRIP page is packed with great resources and information and facts and evidence. And as Heather had mentioned, Michelle has been on the Empower a number of times. Her past presentations are on there. I highly recommend you go through and watch those, as well as our other guests, because the Bible says that, I say that knowledge is power, and when you have it, you have to share it. You got to share it. But the other point of it is that for lack of knowledge, people perish. And our country, for especially the last 11 years, has been under assault as far as the truth is concerned. And that is really slicing away at our democracy and our freedoms. And this particular issue regarding the Indians, regarding land grabs, reparations, everything behind it has nothing to do with their welfare and everything to do with global control and money. And so it is the root of all evil. So Michelle, you are coming on tonight. You're going to educate us some more. You're going to provide evidence. But just as a little overcap, the Globe and Mail recently made a half-hearted apology. It was so pathetic. You jumped on that. I have signed up for your substack. Sorry, all of a sudden the word escaped me. And I'd highly recommend that all of our viewers do. I want to get that in there as the show begins, because when you came out with that report on the Globe and Mail, I could have been easily deceived by others thinking, oh, this is a great report. The media are finally starting to admit they were wrong, but nothing could be farther from the truth. So again, welcome. I'm looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, the Globe and Mail apology, such as it was really fake news giving a fake apology. So, and it really burned me up. I'd also been after them before that for a couple of years. So maybe my Substack had some effect on them. I don't know, but we'll find out.
Well, we have every reason to be outraged by the Globe and Mail, CBC, CTV News, because they've been the propaganda arm for the government. And this has led to church burnings, division,
Yes.
attacks against Canada internationally, our reputation. China took up the baton and called us a genocidal nation. And when I say reckless, I mean it. Our history in those churches burning down, the division that it has caused in this nation from people who are part of the psychosis, the mass psychosis, where they actually believed immediately that 215 children had been murdered and recklessly and carelessly. And so they were more than happy to start pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into this. And it's just criminal. It really is just criminal what's taken place. And there are those, the whole system, I believe, is falling apart as the evidence, thanks to you, Nina Green, Francis Widdowson, Dallas Brody, all of you are out there on the front line exposing the truth. You guys are doing a great job with your investigations and providing the evidence to counter the lies. And that is so critical. So I'm grateful that more and more Canadians are waking up. And I'm looking forward, as I said, to your presentation, because I think calling out the Globe and Mail and making sure it's like, no. Who knows where this could go, if there could even be a legal action against them, because they have a duty to report. They have a duty to make sure that their information is sound and that it is based on facts, that there was an investigation, and they did none of those things.
That's right. Yeah. And they call themselves the paper of record. That's what they're considered in Canada. So, the penultimate of journalism, the place that you would go if you were going through history and you wanted to check back and see, well, what happened in history? Let's look at what the Globe and Mail reported on, because we know that they did the good work of, accurate reporting. They are the paper of record. Well, really? What's history going to say about them?
Well, and interestingly, with all of this information, it seems like a sidetrack, but it is on point, is that Elon Musk has allowed X to be this public platform that people can actually talk on all the issues that the government is trying to censor us on. One of those major topics, like Rupert Lowe in the UK, is exposing that over 250,000 girls have been raped by these Pakistani Muslim gangs. And X is one of the platforms where we can see all of this information. So Keir Starmer is threatening to arrest Elon Musk and wanting to shut him down. And they have nothing to say about the Globe and Mail is also owned by a multi-billionaire. And I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I was reading about that the other day, and I thought, yeah, that is a very interesting point, isn't it? It's always a one-way street with the globalists and the activists that are pushing these very evil and damaging agendas.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Yeah, it is. So why don't we stop there? If anybody, I want to encourage you, you have to be actually on live with us on the Zoom if you have questions. So do register and join us. You can find that on our homepage on Action for Canada if you have questions for Michelle. Anybody else that has a Q&A, just add them to the option here in Zoom, and we'll try to answer some of those at the end and have a little bit of conversation then. But Michelle, for now, I'm going to hand that over and so that you can provide us your presentation.
Very good. Thanks. So criminalizing denialism, burying the facts. So finally, the mainstream media awake from the mass psychosis, sort of. Let's see if they really did. So Blacklock's reporter has reported that federal censors would gain power to censor social media deemed a threat to social stability. But actually, Minister Miller is the one who promoted this claim that residential school denialists showed up with a shovel. There's no accurate reporting on this. There's no newspaper report of it. It could be totally fake news, but he's so upset about residential school denialism. And he even here, I'm just gonna make that smaller. As the denialists resurface this week, I'm reposting this from 2022. The same week, Williams Lake First Nation announced the discovery of 93 potential unmarked graves at the site of St. Joseph's Mission. Well, what's a potential unmarked grave? It might be roots, it might be rocks, it might be an animal burrow. So everyone has the right to question that, because until these claims are proven in a court of law with evidence, they're just claims, they're allegations. And what could be more destabilizing to society than promoting a blood libel on Catholics and Canadian history? And here's Minister Miller promoting sugarcane, which, as Tanya and Heather mentioned, is a so-called documentary by which is now distributed by National Geographic. But when Nina Green and I looked up the facts, it's fake. It's a shockumentary, a schlockumentary. So it turns out that in sugarcane, the mother of the abandoned child pleaded guilty to that charge and was sentenced to 1 year in jail. And what was the claim about? Well, sugarcane misleads the public. Mark Miller promoted the documentary Sugarcane that claimed that at St. Joseph's Indian Residential School, also known as Caribou, claimed that Catholic priests impregnated students, illicit babies were burned in the school incinerator, and that Ed Archie Noisecat is the only baby known to have survived the incinerator. But the facts are that the mother of baby Ed was a woman named Antoinette Archie, actually the grandmother of one of the show's producers. Think about doing that to your grandmother. She was a 20-year-old adult. She was not a student and not a student at the school. Baby Ed's father was a guy named Ray Peters, not a priest. He was 11 years older than her. He fathered at least 17 children with 5 different women. And it was Antoinette who put little Ed in the school's incinerator. She spent a year in jail for abandoning her baby, who she told the court she thought was dead. So these are the people who are rewriting Canadian history with lies. So here's Tanya Talaga. We'll get into a bit more about her later. Canada must stand against residential school denialism. And here's Stephanie Scott, Executive Director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Those who deny the reality of residential schools' history isn't yours to rewrite. And here's, of course, Leah Gazan, claiming that the first genocide that was recognized within Canadian borders. Well, I'm sorry, people, but no one has ever been charged or convicted of genocide in Canada in relation to Indian residential schools. And we must have presumption of innocence. And you would think that Mark Miller would know that. He's a lawyer. And ironically, the mainstream media is helping rewrite history. So I looked at this report, and there's a lot of concern about misinformation out there. And what struck me is that actually people are still trusting the media. So 6 in 10 Canadians report they had high or extreme level of concern about misinformation, but regardless of their level of concern, less than half reported high levels of trust in the media. But this is still 47%. Anyway, as journalism goes, so goes democracy. This is a book by the Canadian Journalism Foundation, and they're all very proud of themselves. And they state right at the top of the book, the very survival of our democracy depends on how well journalists do their job. We all have a stake in that. And Knowlton Nash was a famous broadcaster in his time in Canada. So here's the Globe and Mail winning awards. June 12th, 2025, the Canadian Journalism Foundation, that very foundation I just mentioned, they gave an award to Tanya Talaga for media luminary or organization that has made a global impact through journalism. Yep. She sure did that. And here's another award winner, Philip Crawley, former publisher and CEO of the Globe and Mail, for the CJF Lifetime Achievement Award. And he said in his acceptance speech, "I think what most pleases me with this award is that it is a tribute to the Globe and Mail, which continues to be a beacon of light in what is often a dark media landscape." Famous last words. So here's Canada's paper of record reporting that the remains of 215 children were found at the former Kamloops, BC residential school. That's got to be one of the darkest media stories. The unproven claims of a mass grave and human remains of 215 children reportedly found at the former Kamloops Indian residential school. The Globe and Mail and Tanya Talaga were key figures in the propagation of this unproven claim. And they published on May 27, 2021, a Canadian press story, which is a somewhat rewritten sort of cookie cutter of the press release issued by the Kamloops Band. Now, Canadian Press is jointly owned by the Globe and Mail, Torstar, and Square Victoria Communications Group, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Power Corporation. And Power Corporation is a key stakeholder in China Asset Management. The Globe and Mail is also part of the Trust Project, a journalism outlet vetting project that claims to ensure integrity, accuracy, authoritative, evidence-based reporting by those under its umbrella. It makes you want to cry. Now, 5 years later, the Globe and Mail, Canada's paper of record, finally admitted they'd done no due diligence on the Kamloops Indian Band's claim of human remains of 215 children. No remains have been found. But the fake news issues a fake apology. They kind of just basically said, oops. So what is this? From their apology, they write, "The media, including the Globe and Mail, did not initially scrutinize, much less challenge, that assertion of the confirmation of human remains of 215 children. The initial headlines and stories in the media simply stated that as fact that the remains of the 215 children had been found. Many of those early stories, including in this newspaper, made reference to mass graves, a historically fraught phrase that does not appear in the Kamloops 2021 press release. Did not scrutinize? Huh? You had one job, as they say." And now 5 years later, right? After 5 years of visceral hurt in Canada, where former Indian residential school students were led to believe that their once loved priests, nuns, ministers, and staff were secretly murdering unnamed classmates and burying them clandestinely. 5 years of visceral hurt, where former Indian residential school administrators and staff were relentlessly blood libeled by the mainstream media led by the Globe and Mail. 5 years of deep, gutting wounds inflicted upon devout Catholics and people of other Christian denominations, many of them Indigenous people, as dozens of beloved churches were vandalized or burned to the ground. 2 innocent people died in a church arson. Mainstream media misinformation instigated rage and a lack of societal stability. 5 years after UNDRIP was rammed through the Senate, fraught with guilt and sorrow because of that 215 announcement, 5 years in which Canadian private property rights have been turned upside down with Aboriginal land claims. Richmond residents were surprised to learn that their property, fee simple title rights, might be worthless as the Cowichan tribe's decision came down, and also that they had been denied an opportunity to intervene in the case that had been wending its way through the court for a decade because they might have objected. 5 years. Coincidentally, the passage of UNDRIP gives further weight to the Cowichan claim. Just read Article 26. And thanks in part to the Globe and Mail promoting the Kamloops 215 claim, many private property owners in Richmond may no longer own their homes. Will this happen to the residents of the city of Kamloops too? Because, as you can see, over a decade ago, the city of Kamloops had a claim for Aboriginal title filed against it by the Kamloops Band. So let me ask you this. If on May 26, 2021, you knew that the Kamloops Band had filed claim over the city of Kamloops, Sun Peaks Resort, and all the surrounding territory, would you have believed on May 27th, 2021, that they found 215 dead children in their apple orchard at the old Kamloops Indian Residential School? I bet you would not have believed it. And the Globe and Mail probably would have done more investigative research. But instead, after 5 years, the Globe and Mail offers us an oops. And what's the Globe and Mail's proof? Well, the word of an Indigenous activist journal. In Nina Green's article, Tanya Talaga Has Let the Cat Out of the Bag, she quoted Talaga from her book, The Knowing. As a Globe columnist, I was also fielding questions, but they were coming from the Globe's Parliament Hill Bureau. On one of my first nights there, my editor called me. It was late. I was in my hotel room, exhausted. She apologized for what she was about to ask me. She apologized for asking a question. That's what journalists do. And she said, the Prime Minister's office, the RCMP, is questioning the numbers, the 215. There was more. There's talk that there's internal strife in the community. I told my editor that what she heard was categorically not true. The number was correct. And furthermore, that I had not seen any division. In fact, I'd seen the exact opposite, unity. She said she'd tell everyone what I said, and she apologized for having to be the messenger. We hung up. Who was actually the messenger? Talaga. After 5 years, when apologizing, the Globe and Mail further misleads people and repeats disproven tropes. So they blame John Horgan and Justin Trudeau for not apologizing. They claim as fact that children were snatched from their homes. In fact, parents had voluntarily and formally applied. They had to fill out an application form for their kid to go to Indian residential school. They claim as fact that 3,200 children died at Indian residential schools. In fact, only 423 died at Indian residential schools, very sadly, but that's over the course of 133 years and 139 schools. That's not genocide. It's sad, but, we have children who inadvertently die from accidents, sports accidents, chem lab accidents at school these days. So it does happen. And then the Globe and Mail says a government official thought Indian residential schools were close to manslaughter. Well, Nina Green did some research. It was not a government official, but a missionary. It was not about Indian residential schools, but about teaching hygienic rules. So they claim as fact that Indian residential school students died at a rate just far higher than children in the rest of Canada, a negligence so deeply rooted that it came within unpleasant nearness of manslaughter, according to a government official in the early 1900s. No, the source, which Globe and Mail fails to provide, is a letter by Samuel Hume Blake, published in a pamphlet to the members of the Board of Management of the Missionary Society of the Church of England in Canada. Blake was not a government official, as falsely claimed by the Globe and Mail, and the statement in his letter was to the Honorable Frank Oliver, Minister of the Interior, on the 27th of January, 1907. It was not about residential schools. So you can read it here. if you seek to draw the Indian from the wigwam and out of door life, you must educate him in the ordinary hygienic rules, the non-observance of which cultivates tuberculosis and scrofulous affections, principal causes in the high death rate. The appalling number of deaths among the younger children appeals loudly to the guardians of our Indians. In doing nothing to obviate the preventable causes of death, it brings the department within unpleasant nearness to the charge of manslaughter. But it's not about Indian residential schools. It's about the fact that the people who were making the transition from living a hunter-gatherer life to a settled life in a home had no hygienic skills. And then he offers, let there be at least 50 carefully selected chosen centers in the Northwest, a thoroughly trained nurse appointed to carry on this work and to give systematic instruction to the Indian women and children in regard to those domestic matters of which they in their new life are ignorant and which make so much for the health and happiness of these fellow beings so largely dependent on us. Now, this man is seeking to find a healthful solution for Native people, while the Globe and Mail is trying to denigrate Canada as guilty of manslaughter. And Globe and Mail, what's this BS? While apologizing, the Globe and Mail dumps more fuel on the fire, saying many students were physically abused or sexually abused, and all were the target of systematic effort by the Canadian government over decades to snatch them from their homes and families, eradicate their culture and heritage. That too is reality, a damning reality. It's not. Some students were abused. There were 31 convictions listed in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports, over 139 schools in 133 years. We all wish that number was 0, but that's a very low ratio. Most students were voluntarily enrolled by their own parents who wanted them to have useful education for the modern world. Some parents wanted the free daycare. Some parents had remarried, and sadly, the new partner did not want the other's kids. And many families were huge by today's standards, and even the standards then. Families with 10, 12, 14 children could not feed and care for them all, so many of the kids were sent to Indian residential school to survive. The kids may not have liked it or understood that their parents were all part of the scheme. But how is this different from today's parent taking a child to their first day of school, distracting them with a toy, and then running away? And education was a treaty obligation which was fulfilled when chiefs and councils requested a school. The Indian residential school system was agreed to by Indian chiefs. Schools were requested by chiefs and council. Education was part of treaty obligations, not for snatching. The IRS system was set up with prior review and approval by numerous Indian chiefs, as told in historian Don Smith's article, The Chief's Journey. So they went, a handful of chiefs went down east. They saw the Mohawk Institute. They had students give presentations. They saw what they were teaching and learning. They saw how society was developing. They approved. And there were some children who were snatched. But they were snatched from the jaws of destitution, neglect, and hunger. Today we call it being apprehended, a child taken into custody because the risks in the home outweighed the ensuing challenges of separation from parents. And here's some examples. This is Alan Higgs, a former social worker, writes, "Yes, I scooped children, and here's why." So he said he received word some parents hadn't been seen in several days. Go to the house, there's no heat, no firewood. What little food there is frozen, crying baby on the floor, her wet diaper frozen to the floor. The police insist I accompany them at 3 a.m. to a rural area, arrived to find a drunken orgy with children under 10 present. Minus 35 Celsius, that's about minus 31 Fahrenheit. Make a patrol down the alley behind beer parlors and find 2 carloads of children in vehicles. The windows are frosted over inside. Children are cold and hungry. Not the first time I found this situation. I step into the bar and I hear, Oh, it's the welfare. After midnight at our home. So he's at his own home. There's banging on the back door. Open it up to a girl, 6, a boy, 7, who say, Mister, come to our house. There's blood all over. Arrive at the house. Indeed, blood and beer everywhere. Walls, ceiling, floor. A crib is upside down. The baby is screaming. I look in the bedroom. I see a naked 19-year-old and her boyfriend having intercourse. Observe another female naked from the waist up in the other room. Police officer arrives. Second day on the job, his eyes are popping. Turns out the female in the other room had a breast slashed in two, and this is causing the blood. And he says, we tried very hard to work within community structures, like within the reserve band structure, chiefs, counselors, band staff, families. But because the parents were problem drinkers who fought with everyone, folks were reluctant to offer support for the children, let alone the parents. We heard over and over again, I don't want to get involved.
In times of financial uncertainty, safeguarding your assets is increasingly important. In response to ongoing inflation, economic challenges, and market instability, many Canadians are adopting the timeless strategy of investing in precious metals. Historically, gold and silver have held their value, safeguarding your assets against economic turmoil. Action for Canada is pleased to announce our partnership with Steve of Sun City Silver, providing valued members of A4C with expanded investment opportunities designed to help you achieve your financial goals. Steve is an ally of the Freedom Movement, and he's offering members of Action for Canada exclusive access to some of Canada's premier prices. By leveraging his connections with Silver Gold Bull, you can access competitive rates for securing your precious metals. Silver Gold Bull is a trusted Canadian leader, offering live pricing 24/7 and boasting nearly 400,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot. For an order of $5,000, be sure to indicate you're an Action for Canada member and receive a complimentary 1967 silver dollar, courtesy of Sun City Silver. Expand your collection further by referring a new customer who places a similar order, and Steve will reward you with a special bonus thank you gift. Your purchase with Steve is a dual investment. You invest in your future while simultaneously supporting the Freedom Movement with a percentage of each sale benefiting Action for Canada. For more information, be sure to visit actionforcanada.com/purchasing-precious-metals/. Secure your assets. Protect your future. Support Action for Canada and the Freedom Movement. The information presented is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended to provide financial, legal, or tax advice, as we are not licensed financial advisors, accountants, or attorneys and cannot provide professional counsel. Be advised that the content and information provided does not create a client relationship. We recommend you consult with a qualified professional advisor before making any financial, legal, or tax decisions. Please note that Action for Canada is not responsible for an individual's financial outcome. Remember, your decisions are your own, and we recommend doing your own research before making any investment.
So mainstream media has helped destroy Canada's identity, our proud history, our heritage of educating and lifting up the poor and of saving orphaned children. So this is something that the Reclamaire found. And if you're interested in this topic, please do follow the Reclamaire. He or she keeps finding these wonderful vignettes of history. April 17, 1947. Father O'Grady, principal at Kamloops Residential School, writes to Minister McKay, Indian Commissioner for BC. These children are mostly orphans, and I found it difficult when requested not to accept them. They would otherwise have had no one to care for them. So they had 295 children had per capita grants because that's how the school system worked. But the orphans had nothing. They had no financial support. And Father O'Grady is beseeching the government to provide financial support for these orphans. That's not genocide. And Nina Green writes, the Globe and Mail then goes on in the 30th of May 2026 article to make excuses for former BC Premier John Horgan. Politicians also helped to fuel public perceptions that the bodies of hundreds of children had been found. John Horgan, then BC Premier, called Kamloops a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. In the wake of the initial announcement, Mr. Horgan had no way of knowing whether that was true. So Nina writes, of course, Premier Horgan had a way of knowing whether the Kamloops band claim was true. The Globe and Mail and the City Council in Kamloops had advance notice of the Kamloops band's claim. It's unthinkable that the Kamloops band would have given a heads up to Kamloops City Council and the Globe and Mail without also a heads up to the Premier of BC. All Premier Horgan had to do was to ask the RCMP and the BC Coroner's Office to investigate and to insist that the Kamloops band not recklessly send out immediate release until the RCMP and coroner had completed their investigations. And that goes for the government of Canada too. And surprise, guess what? In 2003, the RCMP issued this report, but did not make it public. This is an 8-year RCMP task force investigation into 15 Indian residential schools in BC. And if you click on the link from the PDF, as explained in detail here, the RCMP's 8-year Native Indian Residential School Task Force investigation into all of these allegations at 15 BC Indian residential schools was carried out from 1995 to 2003. And there were a significant involvement of activists, Indigenous activists throughout. So it's not like this was a secret thing that the RCMP did. The Indigenous activists were directly involved in it, including Charlene Bellew. By 2003, the investigation had essentially come up with nothing. So the RCMP wrapped it up, but they decided not to release the final report. So, inaccurate reporting and no balance whatsoever. So here's the Globe and Mail's editorial code of conduct. The credibility of the conduct in the Globe and Mail on all platforms rests on solid research, clear, intelligent writing, maintaining a reputation for honesty, accuracy, fairness, balance, and transparency in all created content. And to these ends, the following rules and principles apply. The Globe and Mail will seek to provide reasonable accounts of competing views in any controversy so as to enable readers to make up their minds. Go and see how many competing views there are in Globe and Mail on this topic. It is unacceptable to invent or falsify a quote, source, anecdote, detail, or anything else pertaining to the news. Right. And then the Globe and Mail wrote, the First Nations are owed a greater debt. No, they're not. Canadian taxpayers are paying out more than $60 billion to reconcile with 1.8 million Indigenous Canadians who get many benefits that Canadians do not. So I won't go into detail on this graph, but it shows the amount of money that bands have and the numbers of people in the band. So most people think First Nations, I think they envision them as, the size of cities, right? Of the 600 plus First Nations, over 500 have total registered populations smaller than 2,000 people. There are only 62 bands with registered reserve populations of over 2,000 people. There are 150 bands with registered reserve populations of less than 100 people. It's absurd. So the mass media created a mass psychosis. And you can see they had 61, I did a search, and there's 61 results with mass graves, Kamloops, for because also in their apology, they said, yeah, we stopped using the word mass graves. We didn't do that. Well, what does it say here? The discovery of a mass grave site at the former residential school in Kamloops is just the tip of the iceberg. So this is not only an opinion, it's a predictive opinion using a term that they said they didn't use. And if you want to see how the media messed up, you can read my report that I did debunking Sean Carlton and Reed Gerbrand's report, where they tried to claim, it's only deniers who are claiming that people said mass grave. That never happened in the media. No. Yeah, read my report and see. So thanks to irresponsible media, we now also have a geopolitical complication from China and its despot nation allies. So the day after UNDRIP received royal assent, China accused Canada of human rights violations and demanded that the UN Human Rights Council investigate. So they were joined by Russia, Iran, North Korea, and other allies. What a nice, friendly bunch of people these guys are. Now, I find that very suspicious because it was immediately the day after that UNDRIP received royal assent. And what did they claim as evidence? Well, the 215 find of human remains at Kamloops. What a coincidence. So in May of 2026 in Montreal, just after 4 days of one-sided biased hearings, the Permanent People's Tribunal issued an interim report condemning Canada of genocide, ongoing genocide, and crimes against humanity. And the Permanent People's Tribunal prejudices proceedings by posing the panel of judges in front of a 215 display. To date, there's no list of names of children alleged to be missing, and there are no families with evidence of a missing child and no bodies. And that's not ghoulish. Mark Miller always say, oh, you people are ghoulish, you deniers are ghoulish, you want to see a body. What if I came and said, let's dig up your grandfather? Well, my grandfather is not accused of murdering people, right? If you say that people were murdered, you would want to have evidence of that and either clear the name of people accused, which is in this case the Roman Catholic Church, or you would want to charge the people if they were the perpetrators. You would want the evidence. You would want to see, maybe a child died late in history, in the earliest times, maybe they were an orphan there, and maybe they died in, I don't know, the late in the early 1900s and were buried in unconsecrated ground. That's almost unbelievable that would happen. But, that's a possibility. Were they murdered? Were they buried covertly? Was there some kind of crime involved? You would want to clear that, right? You can't just sit around and have people do a presentation and decide that people are guilty of genocide or a country's guilty of genocide. So the Land Back movement is not about reconciliation or truth. It's a red-green alliance intent on the destruction of Judeo-Christian North America and Western civilization in general. And Canadian taxpayers are funding their own country's destruction. And just so you know, Kimberly Murray's special interlocutor's office was not located in Canada. So she was executive director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She claims in an affidavit to have written all of the reports for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then she wrote 3 more reports as the special interlocutor. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission cost us $70 million. Sorry about that, $70 million. And her special interlocutor's office cost us over $10 million. And yet it was located in a place you are no longer in Canada. Foreign agent? So you better believe that these reports and claims are stacking up at the UN Human Rights offices, and they will be used against Canada. Even though false, the parties charging Canada with such crimes will simply point to the evidence, like that published in the Globe and Mail. So you can read or watch my presentations on the Permanent People's Tribunal or my rebuttal to Kimberly Murray, where I say that history needs context. And there's nothing hateful anywhere in my work. I just want the facts and evidence. So this is my Substack. There's quite a few other. I took a shot also at Canada Land because they issued an equally limp apology. So have a look at that, and that's my website, michellestirling.com. And don't let the tyranny of guilt, of shame, induced by fake news, and the mass media make you cower in silence. You have to speak up, and you have to be sorry no more. Thanks very much.
So thank you for that presentation. You move through that with fact after fact. That's like I say, you're not out attacking anybody. You're providing the truth. You're providing the evidence. And I would really encourage our viewers to, once we upload this presentation and this interview, to share it with your elected officials. At the end, I'm going to bring up a campaign that we've been doing, and it's like, know who you're going to vote for. This is what's going to bring about the kind of change to shut down all of this propaganda and all of these agendas to overtake Canada. Michelle talked about the Red-Green Alliance. That's the United Nations. It's a third Sharia compliant Muslim, and it is pretty much two-thirds China run. and so they're all vying for position. Both of them are vying for position as to how they can take over Canada. And so sometimes they say, these useful idiots can work together for a little while, and one is ultimately going to win. And instead of that happening, we need to say no. We need to make sure that if we want this overturned, we need to get very serious in upcoming elections. We need to make sure we're involved in the process, being scrutineers, demanding right now that the voting machines are not permitted to be used. You got to lobby government. And you've got to find terrific people in your communities to run for office, help them become known in the community. So we're not just checking a ballot and saying, oh, what's the worst or the
Right.
least of the worst of these and going from there. Now, I find what you were just talking about the fact that they're not doing any digging, and of course they're going to come back how this would be in violation of their traditions, and it would be a horrible thing to put their relatives through. And I heard a term used that they were going to uphold oral traditions and stories, and instead of having facts. And so that's what they now want to shift to. No, just take it. These are oral traditions and stories. We believe that the 215 children are buried. There's no single evidence of it. And you mentioned police would want to do an interview. They would want to do an investigation. I'm thinking about serial killers. Who's going to go to jail without at least one body? If it's going to be a serial killer, you need 2 or 3 bodies. And here we're being accused of killing 215 children. And that's only in in Kamloops. There's many other allegations that have been disproven as well, because they actually did the digging and found no bodies in Manitoba and in other provinces. So I would imagine that everybody that's watching this can see right through the lies, and they're all beginning to look pretty pathetic in trying to uphold this, especially Leah Gazin, and trying to champion this as an MP to continue to call us a genocidal nation. And then we've got somebody in BC.
And to put us in jail.
Yeah, and to put us in jail for so-called denialism. It's like, well, what is there to deny? Until we understand the facts of this, we're going to deny that there's bodies there until it's on them to prove otherwise. And they don't want to do that, because then they know all of this will come crushing down.
Well, it's interesting because another part in Tanya Talaga's book, she actually called Murray Sinclair. And Murray Sinclair, I believe he was in the Senate when he said this, but I'm not 100% sure. But he intervened in what the RCMP had started as an investigation. And you should read it in the book or read one of Nina Green's articles on it because, I don't want to misquote the details. But essentially, the RCMP then said, okay, we're turning it over to the band. Now, they probably had the 2003 report in their hand, and they're kind of like, yeah, we spent 8 years looking into this stuff, and probably hope that the government would, be wise and say, we're alarmed by the statements coming from Kamloops, but until we have actual evidence, we will not make further statements, and instead, Prime Minister Trudeau, jumped on a plane and got a teddy bear and went and took a knee. It was kind of like a copycat movement to the BLM movement, but just, Indigenous. And it's quite interesting now, actually, now that I mention that. I also wrote an article about this book called The Fourth World by George Manuel. Thought I had it here. Anyway, in that book, it shows that the early Red Power movement in North America and in Canada were latched onto the Black Panthers pillars of, organization. And in the U.S., J. Edgar Hoover saw the Black Panthers as a very serious, destructive communist force within the country. And yet this is really what underlies the National Indian Brotherhood, which is now the Assembly of First Nations. So you can read it in The Fourth Nation. It's like right there in the introduction. When I was reading, I'm like, what? So
yeah, that's concerning, isn't it? When we talk about the Red-Green Alliance, that's the Muslims and the communists and Islam and communism working together, and the BLM, they need these Marxist movements in order to continue to tear down and destroy our national identity. And we do have a national identity, despite what Mark Carney just came out and said, that we have no creed, we have no faith, we have no this and that. And it's like, you are just such a big liar. And again, it's just a push to, I think he's even trying to aggravate people by the words that he's saying. I do not believe he's going to succeed, and we'll keep fighting to make that happen. I have a couple of questions here that people have put in the Q&A, and one of them was, what is your perspective on the recently published book, Talk Treaty to Me, Understanding the Basics of Treaties and Land in Canada by Crystal Gale Fraser and Sarah Karminski, I believe it was. So have you heard of that book?
I haven't heard of it, and I haven't read it. So
okay, and then a second question to that, I believe by the same person, was if you could recommend several top books that would help people understand the Indian situation in Canada.
Well, I would go back to historic books like this one's hard to find, but Riders of the Plains. It's a very old book, or the Turner Official Diaries of the RCMP, all of the books by Dr. Hugh Dempsey. My area of knowledge is mostly related to Western Canada, but really it was the West where Canada was bonded as a nation. The Mounties coming west was actually the big elbows up move at the time, if people can understand that, because in the States, they were waging Indian wars in the States from 1644 to 1924. By 1924, we had been educating Indian children in schools for 50 years. So, it was a very different relationship, and there were almost no direct violent conflicts in Canada with Indian people and traders and settlers. And partly because MacDonald was very wise. He saw what was going on in the United States, and he said, well, okay, we don't want that to happen here. Why don't we make a deal with people? And, the government already knew that the nomadic way of life was dying and that the buffalo were dying. I think they didn't realize how quickly they would be killed off. And that was mostly in the US, because they were trying to build the train across the US, and the buffalo numbers were so huge, they often could run for days. So the train had to stop and wait for the herd to go by. And also the furs were in demand for coats, and the leather was in demand for the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The buffalo tongue was a delicacy. So anyway, so by what had happened is these American traders, whiskey traders, had infiltrated southern Alberta, and they were getting all the Indians mad drunk on this horrible blend of strychnine, tea, whiskey, whatever junk they could put in it. And they also had a cup that was rounded on the bottom. So, you couldn't take a sip and then put it down like you could, when you're having a social drink. So they would drink the whole thing, go crazy. They were giving away their wives, all their furs for nothing. And that's what the Mounties did when they came west. They stopped all of that. That was a genocide going on. They stopped that whiskey trade. They stopped these, random Benton gang infiltrations. And they recognized the Indian people of Canada as being of Canada. And that protected them also from the U.S. cavalry. So, these are things in the context of the time that made perfect sense. And now people look back and say, well, why did they make us wards of the state? Well, so that they could be rescued from the U.S. cavalry, so that the U.S. cavalry couldn't just come over the border and in hot pursuit. In fact, when Sitting Bull, after Sitting Bull wiped out Lieutenant Colonel Custer and all of his men, where did Sitting Bull go and his people? They came to Canada. And you know who is the great-grandfather of Leah Gazan? One of those children of the tribe of Lakota that came over the border. And you know what? He went to Indian residential school in Regina. And he gained skills. He was a devout Catholic. He built a church. And, she
Wow.
she is completely misleading us on her history.
Right. And so and so ungrateful as well to know that history and then to disparage Canadians and attack them in such a vicious way. And as you're talking about all of these books, and this is why it's so important to preserve history, I've known a couple of people that work in libraries, and they said they're clearing the shelves of our historical books and throwing them out back in a big bin, ready for destruction. And if we don't have those written down, if we don't maintain those copies, we will lose this history. And that's one of the reasons, Michelle, that I love having you on to provide presentations. It's all good to read those books on history, but you take the history. You and Nina Green have dived into finding the receipts, if I could say it that way, just what you are providing as information about sugarcane and undoing that so-called documentary that was founded on just a stack of lies. And again, there are laws against deceiving the masses. The media should be held accountable. Leah Gazan should be held accountable, as well as you talk about Tanya Talaiga. And the responsibility that she bears in this. What about the people that died in that church? So one of the things I would encourage people to do is go to the libraries and or purchase those books, finds ways, go to bookstores, and just make sure you would preserve them. With that in mind, is there anything else that you could, because that's a really good point, is there anything else that you could recommend that our viewers could do to help either stand against this, to preserve our history? What can we do moving forward?
Well, I've issued an open letter to Sean Fraser calling for an inquiry into the unproven claims, the fact that ministers are denigrating us. There's a very curious letter that was published by the 13 grassroots families of the Kamloops band, and it was published in the Globe and Mail on October 18th, I think, of 2021. And you would think that they would be, if they were going to do something like that, they would be grieving the loss of their 215 children, but they simply repeat the mass graves and genocide allegations off the top, and then go on to demand taxation and land rights. So, I think the big push for UNDRIP to go through is that they were hoping that once it went through, then their claim over the city of Kamloops would be settled because of Article 26. Mm-hmm. And in fact, UNDRIP and Article 26 were used as justification as part of the Cowichan ruling. So that, you have to understand that UNDRIP had passed through the House of Commons, and it was going to the Senate when this news was released. And you can see the senators, they were all sobbing. I mean, everyone in Canada, I think, was in shock. I was in shock, but I thought it was probably a mass grave of, epidemic, typhus, tuberculosis, cholera, if there was a mass grave. But in the past effort to get UNDRIP through the Senate, the senators had filibustered it out to the end of the session, right? But this so shocked them that they approved it with no questions. Even though like 6 premiers and several First Nations had actually pushed back on UNDRIP, but they were unable to stop it. So that's, you have to realize those two things, that UNDRIP was rammed through the Senate because of the claim of the 215, and that China accused Canada of human rights crimes and genocide with all of its despot nation buddies right after UNDRIP was approved. And what did they use as evidence? The 215 claim. So I think there's something very fishy there.
So I think that, finish.
So you can find that open letter to Sean Fraser on my Substack. And, it'd be great if people started sending it to their MPs or phoning their MPs and saying, do something about this. And also the fact that, Kimberly Murray was working from a place that claims to not be in Canada. Like, how can we have a one-woman show effectively putting us into balkanization?
Right. We need evidence is the bottom line. We need to absolutely push back. Canada is such a big country. We have 342 or 43 MPs now. It's gone up a few. And we're going to do this by building communities within communities, like Action for Canada's goal is to mobilize citizens. It's easy within a community to deal with one MP, not so easy to deal with 343. And exactly. So, right, I think it's a good strategy. We need to demand evidence from Kamloops. We are not going to let this go. It's even shocking, if with Indians, with all of their traditions, we're really, really concerned about these loved ones. Wouldn't they want them to be uncovered and bury them in dignity and give them, tombstones, or however it is that they would take care of a loved one once they'd passed away?
Wait.
Okay.
Almost all of the Indians at these schools, their families had converted to Christianity decades before.
Right.
So, it's been suggested that the children were snatched away and forced to convert to Christianity. That's not what happened. The families were already Roman Catholics or Presbyterians or whatever, at Church of England, and the missionaries and priests and clergy often incorporated languages, Aboriginal languages, into the services. And also the missionaries were the early people like Father Lacombe and a number of the priests, the oblate priests in BC. They were the ones who created the syllabics and the dictionaries and the method of transcribing and retaining the languages They were the ones who saved these oral languages from total extinction.
Mhm.
And now these people are being accused of genocide and cultural genocide. It's just sickening. It's
Mhm.
sickening.
It really is, Michelle, and I appreciated your emotion when you were going through a couple of those PowerPoint images presentation, and because I look at it that we know the Christian lifestyle, we know that it doesn't matter. I mean, if people are going to say a certain group is evil, everybody, there is evil all over the earth, no matter even what your culture is. But there are higher levels of evil in certain cultures, and we're seeing that right now. It's certain enough within Middle Eastern cultures, Pakistani cultures. It depends on the way that we are brought up, and that starts practically from birth. So here the Europeans come to Canada and they are met by these tribes, over 640 of them across Canada. The majority of them were infighting. They remain infighting today, arguing about land and fighting one another. And so then you bring in these schools that were either like all Christian, whether Catholic or Presbyterian, Protestant, and you have these people with a heart to love on these kids, to educate them, to help civilize a society that were having tremendous losses because of the way they were living. Tents are not a particularly great way to raise a family in the far north here, in the colder temperatures, -31. You gave some very perfect examples. That's evidence of what they were facing as they would go into the homes of the Indians and the Aboriginals. And this is what they were witnessing. And we're hearing still those same testimonies today. It's heart-wrenching. And so I do care about those people who poured all of their hearts, and then probably when they were at capacity, here are these orphans whose parents maybe went off hunting, didn't come back.
No, they were orphaned. Their parents were dead.
Yeah. And what do you do
So
with
they
that?
had no one. They had no one.
And instead of being grateful, we're being persecuted, undermined. We've paid hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to these people. And I think the majority of Canadians have said enough. We got to get rid of this two-tiered system. We all need to be equal under the law. So agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Somebody asked one more question and then we'll sign off. It had something to do with land acknowledgements, I believe. And where to go? Okay. Is there a facts synopsis to counter the narrative that is available to present to county or municipal councillors on this matter of land acknowledgements?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. I think, well, maybe on Woke Watch, maybe on James Pugh's site. And Jim McMurtry has some funny stuff on X. I can find it and then send it to you, Tanya, and maybe you can put it into the page about this event. But really, there's one fellow in Toronto, I think City Hall, he made a land acknowledgement about taxpayers having funded City Hall and how grateful he is to them. And so I think people could do their own version. The tribes also overlapped a lot, right? I mean, in Alberta, for instance, there's a river called the Battle River in the middle of the province. What was that battle about? It was between the Blackfoot and the Cree. That was their dividing line. So, and it was Father Lacombe who created peace between the two tribes. So, history is just being distorted before our eyes. It's a tragedy.
It is. And I'm just so grateful for you coming on the show and bringing that history back to the front and center. And we've got to preserve this. We've got to embrace it. We've got to share this information. We've got to oppose the agenda, not only against the Indians, but against the Canadians, because it is only a few that are benefiting from this. The chiefs, and I'm not saying all chiefs are bad and all Indians are bad. Please don't send us hate mail about this. But we see there is a massive agenda agenda against the Indians to use them as pawns. There's an agenda against Canadians, and we just need to say no. We need to come together and put a stop to it. So in just a final closing word from you, Michelle, and again, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I just see a note here. Can someone please show how we're not reliving history? Tell me the difference between Germany 1939 and Canada present. You're right. You should maybe read an article on my Substack called Macron's conflict of interest precludes his declaration of a Palestinian state, because you'll see that there's a reason why there's all this crazy anti-Semitism going on. And you know what they say? It's the Saturday people first and then the Sunday people, meaning they'll go after the Jews first and then the rest of us are next.
And it's playing out. We look at Europe, the UK, we look at the Middle East and the countries that they've taken over. It doesn't fare well. And there's definitely an agenda. We can't turn a blind eye to it. We as Canadians have to stop being so nice. And we have a right, we have a national identity. We need to make a determination within ourselves to fight for that national identity. It happens to be a Judeo-Christian nation built on biblical principles, and that's a good thing. And I think that we need to unite on that, because that is what underlies our freedom and democracy. So again, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show. We look forward to having you on again. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Okay. Well, guys, just to quickly wrap this up, I am just going to share my screen because I don't want you to miss out on our page that Heather had pointed out at the beginning. Under current issues, you go down to UNDRIP, you click on UNDRIP, and this is the page that comes up. It has a lot of the information that Michelle was talking about tonight, talks about the RCMP investigation. I could add to this. It's been a little while since I've updated this page. I am talking hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that are funding this reconciliation machine. Here is one of the top reports that came out about the missing and murdered women and children. It ends up that the majority, 86%, was being done by their own people. And videos are at the bottom. You can just keep scrolling down. There's a section here that talks about the graves nationwide, where they were trying to say that the children were murdered. Here it is about the churches. I need to update that because I know it's over 100 churches. This is not at all about doing what is best for the Indians. They literally are using them as pawns, and we need to put a stop to that for them and for us. This is a purpose as well with diversity, equity, inclusion, the DEI, the critical race theory. They're trying to bait us. They're trying to pit us against one another. And we really do need to unite and put a stop to it. As I mentioned earlier, we have a campaign: candidates, support, promote, vote. So find those candidates within your community, just support them financially, go door knocking, promote them, and then vote for them. And do become a scrutineer and make sure you're counting those ballots on the day of the count. Just a quick update. I am going to be in Kelowna next week. There will be an email coming out on it shortly. We're finally going to have our 2 days in court regarding Tyson Cook, aka drag queen Frida Wales, who has filed a vexatious and frivolous notice of civil claim accusing Action for Canada of posting false statements. But all of the statements and information that we've posted on this on the website are all statements and posts that Tyson Cook himself had made. So please pray for us, for our success. It's going to be the week of June 28th, but it is on Friday the 26th that we have to wait till Friday the 26th to find out the 2 days the following week. And so let me just see if I had, so I'm going to be at a rally as well, a freedom event at 12 p.m. on Saturday, the 27th. And then on the 26th, we'll find out if it's going to be the Monday, Tuesday, June 29th and June 30th, or if it's going to be Thursday, Friday, July 2nd and 3rd. And if you can make it and join us, we sure would love your support. Next week, I'm going to be special guest. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen right now. And, the challenge is, are we going to live by Christian principles, or are we going to commit cultural suicide? The answer should be simple. We were gifted. Our fathers of Confederation gave us an amazing gift by founding Canada on the biblical principles. And that is a gift that is worth fighting for. And we need to be committed to that. The Bible verses for today are really quite simple. And there it says that it's using the word simple. It is from Proverbs 14, verse 15. The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. And we are challenging you. We are asking you, be prudent, because they are dishing out a whole lot of lies. And Canadians, through this mass psychosis, have been gobbling it up for years. After the COVID era, so many people, thank God, woke up, and now they're questioning everything. And we need to keep that momentum going. Find people that are dependable, who do the research and investigation, like our dear friend Michelle Stirling. Follow them. Action for Canada does our best, our very, very best, to research and give you always the topmost reliable information. It's not to say that we won't make a mistake, but we'll certainly admit it. But we provide the resources, we provide campaigns, our strategies are working, we're taking background from the enemy, and that's because we're being prudent. So I encourage you to be as well. And I'm just going to keep ending on this next verse for a little while, because I just love it so much. Galatians 6:9, may this encourage you. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. So thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you, and God bless Canada.
Are completely 100% unlawful. Judgment will again be found on justice, and those with virtuous hearts will pursue it. You have a virtuous heart if you are here today pursuing freedom and righteousness. And then verse 23 comes along with a promise. God says he will turn the sins of evil people back on them. He will destroy them for their sins. I take great comfort in that, because I serve a mighty living God who has allowed us to go through this season of discomfort, because we as a nation had turned our backs on him, and we need to get right. So I am just going to thank you so much. I'm going to say, God bless you.